Behind every fortune, there is a scandal. You know what people often say. Behind every great fortune, there is always a secret. But with today's story, I need to be very clear with you about one thing. This is not a secret. This is an entire chain of scandals. A story so real that even the most dramatic period dramas would have to bow before it. And our main character, Arabella Huntington, is a woman who understood, better than anyone, one brutal rule of America's Gilded Age. But before we dive in this video we'll explore who ignited the scandal and why survival was the real motive, what it meant to spend 14 years as the perfect mistress, how she became the richest widow and reached a turning point of power, the marriage that shocked old money, how money was transformed into cultural power, and finally, a victory that only arrived after death. Stay with me, because the biggest surprise waits at the very end. If society refuses to give you a place, then you must build an empire so large they can no longer ignore you. From the start, I want you to remember this. Arabella was not a victim. And she was not a lucky Cinderella. She was an extraordinarily patient player, willing to wait decades for a single decisive victory, a woman excluded from society, light from the starting line. Imagine being born into poverty in Richmond, Virginia, around 1850. Your father dies when you are 9. Your mother is forced to open a boarding house in the city's worst district, surrounded by brothels, gambling dens, and slave markets, where the idea of respectability is a luxury your family cannot afford. That was the world Arabella grew up in. So ask yourself, what does a child raised in such an environment become? 1. She gives up. 2. She becomes dangerous. Arabella chose the second path. She learned early that truth matters less than the story people believe, and so, she began to lie. She lied about her age. She lied about her origins. She lied to transform herself from a poor anonymous girl into a woman who could be acceptable to high society, not to be loved, but to enter the game, meeting the man who would change her entire life. And then in that very harsh world, Arabella met Collis Pay Huntington, a railroad tycoon, 32 years older than her, one of the richest and most powerful men in America. Let me ask you something. What do you think a 19-year-old girl raised in poverty sees when she stands before a man like that? Love? No. She saw a long-term strategy. And Arabella devised a plan so bold that at the time people would have called it immoral. Today we call it power thinking. A marriage that never truly existed in 1869. Arabella married a man named John Archer Worsham, a gambling house owner. But here's the truth you must understand clearly. This marriage was fake. Worsham already had a legal wife in Richmond. The marriage was nothing more than a perfect cover. A cover that allowed Arabella to carry the title Mrs. Worsham, enter New York society, and most importantly appear publicly beside Collis Huntington without being openly labeled a mistress. You see, she didn't break the rules, she bent them. A child and a secret buried for life. In 1870, Arabella gave birth to a son, Archer Milton Worsham. And this is where history begins to whisper. Most historians believe that Collis Huntington was the child's biological father, an illegitimate child, a potential heir, a secret the entire Gilded Age chose to ignore. Soon after, the husband, Worsham, disappeared. On paper, he died. In reality, he simply returned to his legal wife, and Arabella, she became the perfect widow, ready for the next move. 14 years as the perfect mistress. Put yourself in Arabella's position. She was not a wife, not acknowledged, not allowed to stand officially beside the most powerful man in her life. But in exchange, she had time. And Arabella understood one thing perfectly. Time is the most powerful weapon of those without privilege. For 14 years, she lived openly as Huntington's mistress. Everyone knew, no one spoke, no one accepted her. She was excluded from the circles ruled by families like the Vanderbilts. The grand doors of Fifth Avenue never opened for her, but here is what matters. Arabella did not waste those 14 years while society judged her morality. She did something few women dared to do. She made her own money, entering a man's game. And winning. Arabella began investing in New York real estate, not small deals, but transactions large enough to force tycoons to pay attention. In 1877, she bought a parcel of land and later sold it directly to John D. Rockefeller. Let me say that again. A woman, once scorned by society, played on Rockefeller's field and won no title, no marriage, only intellect and nerve. That was when Arabella learned a costly truth. If they refuse to give you status, you create weight so heavy they are forced to respect you. Bought off, land betrayed. Huntington tried to buy Arabella's entry into high society through Ward McAllister, the gatekeeper of New York's elite. The price $9,000, a fortune at the time, but Collis hesitated. He didn't pay in full, and McAllister did exactly what gatekeepers always do when offended. He spread rumors. Vicious whispers swept through New York. There would be no acceptance, no open doors. From that moment on, Arabella and Collis were permanently exiled from society. Did Arabella collapse? No. Diamonds, art, and a long-term investment as compensation. Collis showered Arabella with gifts beyond money. A necklace of 119 blue diamonds from Tiffany & Company, extravagant spending that made New York whisper. But Arabella's greatest investment wasn't jewelry. It was art. Her house on West 54th Street, filled with French lens aesthetic movement interiors, she was building something society could never take from her. Taste and cultural legacy. The turning point. The death of the legal wife in 1884, Elizabeth Huntington, Collis's legal wife, died, and in a single moment, 14 years of waiting ended. Collis married Arabella immediately in San Francisco. The officiant was Henry Ward Beecher, paid $4,000 for the ceremony. You can call it luxury or call it what it truly was, the price of legitimizing 14 years of adultery. At the same time, Collis adopted Archer, then 14 years old, a silent acknowledgement everyone understood. The widow who won everything on August 13, 1900, Collis Pay Huntington died. New York held its breath. The marriage was controversial. The wife was once a social stain, and the fortune was enormous. Then the will was read. Arabella didn't just survive, she won completely. She inherited over $50 million. In today's terms, roughly $1.9 billion, 2/3 of the Huntington empire was hers. The remainder went to Collis's nephew, Henry E. Huntington. Society thought the story was over. They were wrong. When money is no longer the final goal, Arabella now had everything she lacked her entire life, financial power. But money could not buy one thing: true social legitimacy. So Arabella made a decision that stunned the entire Gilded Age. The marriage that shocked old money after 7 years of calculated courtship. On July 16, 1913, in Paris, 63-year-old Arabella married 63-year-old Henry E. Huntington, her late husband's nephew. This was not scandal. This was the final move, a consolidation of power, a declaration of victory. The final legacy. Arabella died on September 16, 1924, in New York. 3 years later, Henry died. Their estate became the Huntington Library, not named Vanderbilt, not Astor, Huntington. A place where history remembers builders, not gatekeepers. The final question: so what do you think? Was Arabella Huntington a calculating lover, a ruthless social climber, or a strategic genius who understood that in an unfair world only the final outcome matters? If you were Arabella, what would you have done differently? Leave your thoughts below. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories are not about evil, but about women who understand the rules better than the men who wrote them. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. I wish you a wonderful day and good health. Behind every fortune, there is a scandal. You know what people often say. Behind every great fortune, there is always a secret. But with today's story, I need to be very clear with you about one thing. This is not a secret. This is an entire chain of scandals. A story so real that even the most dramatic period dramas would have to bow before it. And our main character, Arabella Huntington, is a woman who understood, better than anyone, one brutal rule of America's Gilded Age. But before we dive in this video we'll explore who ignited the scandal and why survival was the real motive, what it meant to spend 14 years as the perfect mistress, how she became the richest widow and reached a turning point of power, the marriage that shocked old money, how money was transformed into cultural power, and finally, a victory that only arrived after death. Stay with me, because the biggest surprise waits at the very end. If society refuses to give you a place, then you must build an empire so large they can no longer ignore you. From the start, I want you to remember this. Arabella was not a victim, and she was not a lucky Cinderella. She was an extraordinarily patient player, willing to wait decades for a single decisive victory, a woman excluded from society, light from the starting line. Imagine being born into poverty in Richmond, Virginia, around 1850. Your father dies when you are 9. Your mother is forced to open a boarding house in the city's worst district, surrounded by brothels, gambling dens, and slave markets, where the idea of respectability is a luxury your family cannot afford. That was the world Arabella grew up in. So ask yourself, what does a child raised in such an environment become? 1. She gives up. 2. She becomes dangerous. Arabella chose the second path. She learned early that truth matters less than the story people believe, and so, she began to lie. She lied about her age. She lied about her origins. She lied to transform herself from a poor anonymous girl into a woman who could be acceptable to high society, not to be loved, but to enter the game, meeting the man who would change her entire life. And then, in that very harsh world, Arabella met Collis Pay Huntington, a railroad tycoon, 32 years older than her, one of the richest and most powerful men in America. Let me ask you something. What do you think a 19-year-old girl raised in poverty sees when she stands before a man like that? Love? No. She saw a long-term strategy. And Arabella devised a plan so bold that at the time people would have called it immoral. Today we call it power thinking, a marriage that never truly existed in 1869. Arabella married a man named John Archer Worsham, a gambling house owner. But here's the truth you must understand clearly. This marriage was fake. Worsham already had a legal wife in Richmond. The marriage was nothing more than a perfect cover. A cover that allowed Arabella to carry the title Mrs. Worsham, enter New York society, and most importantly appear publicly beside Collis Huntington without being openly labeled a mistress. You see, she didn't break the rules, she bent them. A child and a secret buried for life. In 1870, Arabella gave birth to a son, Archer Milton Worsham. And this is where history begins to whisper. Most historians believe that Collis Huntington was the child's biological father, an illegitimate child, a potential heir, a secret the entire Gilded Age chose to ignore. Soon after, the husband, Worsham, disappeared. On paper, he died. In reality, he simply returned to his legal wife, and Arabella, she became the perfect widow, ready for the next move. 14 years as the perfect mistress. Put yourself in Arabella's position. She was not a wife, not acknowledged, not allowed to stand officially beside the most powerful man in her life. But in exchange, she had time. And Arabella understood one thing perfectly. Time is the most powerful weapon of those without privilege. For 14 years, she lived openly as Huntington's mistress. Everyone knew, no one spoke, no one accepted her. She was excluded from the circles ruled by families like the Vanderbilts. The grand doors of Fifth Avenue never opened for her. But here is what matters. Arabella did not waste those 14 years while society judged her morality. She did something few women dared to do. She made her own money, entering a man's game. And winning Arabella began investing in New York real estate, not small deals, but transactions large enough to force tycoons to pay attention. In 1877, she bought a parcel of land and later sold it directly to John D. Rockefeller. Let me say that again. A woman, once scorned by society, played on Rockefeller's field and won no title, no marriage, only intellect and nerve. That was when Arabella learned a costly truth. If they refuse to give you status, you create weight so heavy they are forced to respect you. Archer, then 14 years old. A silent acknowledgement everyone understood. The widow who won everything on August 13, 1900. Collis Pay Huntington died. New York held its breath. The marriage was controversial. The wife was once a social stain, and the fortune was enormous. Then the will was read. Arabella didn't just survive, she won completely. She inherited over $50 million. In today's terms, roughly $1.9 billion, 2/3 of the Huntington empire was hers. The remainder went to Collis's nephew, Henry E. Huntington. Society thought the story was over. They were wrong. When money is no longer the final goal, Arabella now had everything she lacked her entire life: financial power. But money could not buy one thing: true social legitimacy. So Arabella made a decision that stunned the entire Gilded Age. The marriage that shocked old money after 7 years of calculated courtship on July 16, 1913. In Paris, 63-year-old Arabella married 63-year-old Henry E. Huntington, her late husband's nephew. This was not scandal. This was the final move, a consolidation of power, a declaration of victory. The final legacy. Arabella died on September 16, 1924, in New York. 3 years later, Henry died. Their estate became the Huntington Library, not named Vanderbilt, not Astor, Huntington. A place where history remembers builders, not gatekeepers. The final question: so what do you think? Was Arabella Huntington a calculating lover, a ruthless social climber, or a strategic genius who understood that in an unfair world only the final outcome matters? If you were Arabella, what would you have done differently? Leave your thoughts below. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories are not about evil, but about women who understand the rules better than the men who wrote them. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. I wish you a wonderful day and good health.
Some deaths beg for conspiracy theories. The victim moved in powerful circles, the timing was suspicious, evidence conveniently disappeared. But when a woman dies violently after spending 12 years as the secret mistress of a multimillionaire political advisor, after suing his estate for millions, after publicly detailing the romantic depravities of men who shaped presidential policy, people ask questions. Furthermore, when her lawyer claims videotapes exist showing government officials in compromising positions, then those tapes conveniently vanish, the questions multiply. Thus, on today's episode of Old Money Allure, we explore the short, exploited life and brutal death of Vicki Morgan, and ask whether she was silenced by conspiracy or destroyed by the same forces that had controlled her since she was 17 years old. Foster care had taught Victoria Lynn Morgan survival skills, but nothing prepared the 17-year-old for meeting a man who collected people the way museums collect art. Alfred S. Bloomingdale spotted her in 1970 among the aspiring models and actresses orbiting Los Angeles' wealth. Pretty, photogenic, desperate enough to be moldable. Born in 1952, Vicki had bounced through broken homes and unstable family arrangements, learning early that beauty was currency in a world that offered her nothing else. At 54, he was triple her age, heir to the Bloomingdale department store fortune, co-founder of Diners Club, and a multimillionaire whose money opened every door in California. The power imbalance was absolute from their first meeting, a teenage girl who had nothing meeting a man who could buy anything. The Reagan era would soon elevate him further, placing him in the exclusive kitchen cabinet of wealthy businessmen who shaped presidential policy from Beverly Hills dinner parties. His wife Betsy personified society elegance, Nancy Reagan's best friend, queen of charity balls, guardian of Republican respectability, who presided over dinners where California's power brokers decided America's future. Behind this immaculate facade, court documents would later allege Alfred maintained appetites that would have horrified his conservative allies. He installed Vicki in apartments, each upgrade marking another year of their relationship, another layer of financial arrangement. 2 divorces from brief teenage marriages were handled with financial assistance from Alfred's accounts. Cars appeared in her name, jewellery accumulated, designer clothes filled closets, creating a lifestyle of complete financial dependence. Friends heard him call her his girl, his project, sometimes describing their arrangement in terms that suggested both personal and financial dimensions. He spoke of helping her, guiding her, providing stability she'd never had, words that would later be scrutinised in court. 12 years passed in this arrangement, Vicki aging from teenager to woman, while the relationship's dynamics evolved. Court documents filed in 1982 would make allegations about what she claimed to have endured during those years. According to her sworn statements, Alfred had specific sexual preferences that required elaborate scenarios she felt compelled to facilitate. She described herself as his therapist, though this was her characterization of activities that involved coordinating encounters with other women. These sessions, according to her legal filings, followed patterns she claimed were necessary to manage his psychological needs. Her allegations painted a picture of activities that, if true, would have destroyed his public reputation. Financial support insulated her from questioning this arrangement or seeking independence. First-class travel, designer goods, restaurant reservations, each luxury reinforced the lifestyle that kept her in his orbit. Her isolation was complete. No career, no savings, no social circle outside Alfred's world, no identity beyond their relationship. She existed in circumstances that her lawsuit would later characterize as total dependence. When Alfred was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the early 80s, the financial arrangements that had sustained her for 12 years faced disruption. According to her later claims, payments stopped after his death, leaving her suddenly without income or resources. Financial desperation drove Vicki Morgan to file legal action in 1982, bringing allegations that would generate headlines across America. Alfred Bloomingdale had died, and according to Vicki's lawsuit, promises of continued support had not been honoured by his estate. The woman who had lived comfortably for 12 years faced eviction notices and creditor calls with no means of support. No professional skills, no degree, no work history, just expensive habits and knowledge of a relationship she now sought to monetize through the courts. Her $11 million palimony suit against the Bloomingdale estate sought recognition of what she claimed were promises of lifetime support. The filing documented 12 years of financial arrangements, emphasizing continuity and what she characterized as mutual understanding. She detailed apartments, cars, gifts, and regular payments, the infrastructure of a long-term financial relationship. Her lawsuit went beyond monetary claims, making allegations about Alfred's private conduct that shocked conservative supporters. According to her sworn statements, she had facilitated encounters that involved activities she characterized as reflecting his psychological compulsions. She described her role as managing these situations, presenting herself as essential to controlling what she portrayed as dangerous tendencies. The allegations, while unproven, created sensational headlines during Reagan's presidency. Media coverage focused on the contrast between public morality and alleged private conduct among the president's associates. The kitchen cabinet members' alleged activities, as described in court filings, contradicted the administration's family values messaging. Nancy Reagan's friendship with Betsy Bloomingdale added another layer of society scandal to the legal proceedings. Conservative donors who had supported Reagan's political rise found themselves associated with sordid allegations. The Los Angeles establishment responded to Vicki's lawsuit with social ostracism. She had violated unwritten rules about discretion, using the legal system to publicise what had previously remained private. Society figures who had tolerated her presence now treated her as persona non grata. The judge reviewing her case applied established legal precedents regarding palimony claims. Legal recognition required proof of a marriage-like relationship with mutual obligations beyond financial support for companionship. The court concluded that the arrangement, as evidenced, was primarily financial rather than quasi-marital. The ruling's language categorised the relationship in terms that devastated Vicki's legal position and social standing. 12 years were legally reduced to a business arrangement, promises became unenforceable, and her allegations yielded no financial relief. The woman who had lived in luxury now faced poverty with her reputation destroyed by her own legal filings. Marvin Pancoast offered his North Hollywood condominium to Vicki Morgan when homelessness seemed her only alternative. 33 years old, unemployed, struggling with documented mental health issues, Pancoast had his own history of difficulties. Court records would later detail his psychiatric hospitalizations, medication regimens, and suicide attempts. Multiple mental health professionals had treated him for conditions requiring ongoing management. Vicki's housing crisis after losing her lawsuit left her with few options beyond accepting his offer of shelter. The arrangement paired two people in difficult circumstances, she facing financial ruin, he battling mental illness. Their cohabitation created a dynamic that friends later described as mutually destructive. According to witness testimony, tensions existed from the beginning of their shared living situation. She reportedly spoke to him in ways that reflected her frustration with her reduced circumstances. Comments about various aspects of his life reportedly caused friction between them. His mental state, according to later psychiatric evaluations, was deteriorating due to medication non-compliance. He had stopped taking prescribed treatments, a decision that would have serious consequences. The North Hollywood condominium became an environment of escalating psychological pressure. Friends who visited described an atmosphere of barely contained conflict between the roommates. She would reference her former lifestyle and connections, maintaining pretenses despite changed circumstances. He would reportedly react to perceived slights with increasing emotional instability. The living situation deteriorated over several months of cohabitation. July 6, 1983, brought a confrontation that neighbours later reported hearing. According to witness statements, Vicki announced she had found alternative housing arrangements. She reportedly told Pancoast she would be leaving, ending their problematic shared living situation. For someone with his documented psychological vulnerabilities, rejection triggered a severe emotional response. According to his later statements to authorities, he felt used and discarded. The night passed with him experiencing what psychiatrists would later analyse as an acute psychological crisis. His thoughts, by his own later admission, turned violent as untreated mental illness affected his judgment. The combination of perceived rejection, medication non-compliance, and existing psychiatric conditions created a dangerous situation. By morning, his mental state had deteriorated to the point of homicidal ideation. On July 7, 1983, Marvin Pancoast committed the act that would end Vicki Morgan's life. The attack occurred in her bedroom while she slept, according to police reports. Multiple injuries resulted in her death at age 30, ending a life that had seen extremes of luxury and desperation. Investigators documented the scene without releasing graphic details to protect the victim's dignity. Pancoast immediately called police to confess, waiting calmly for their arrival. "I just killed someone," he told the dispatcher, according to official transcripts. Officers found him cooperative, making no attempt to flee or deny his actions. The case initially appeared straightforward, a domestic homicide with a confessed perpetrator. Standard procedures were followed, evidence collected, and the suspect taken into custody without incident. Then Pancoast's attorney Arthur Behrens held a press conference that transformed the case's trajectory. Behrens made claims about videotapes allegedly showing Alfred Bloomingdale and government officials in compromising situations. According to Behrens, these supposed recordings depicted activities similar to those Vicki had described in her lawsuit. The attorney suggested his client had seen evidence that powerful people wanted suppressed. The implication was that Vicki Morgan's death related to knowledge of damaging information about political figures. Behrens presented a theory of conspiracy without providing supporting evidence. Media coverage exploded as outlets reported on possible connections between the murder and alleged political scandals. The story combined elements guaranteed to attract attention: politics, scandal, and mysterious evidence. Attorney Robert Steinberg then entered the narrative, claiming direct knowledge of the supposed recordings. He announced he had secured these materials and would reveal them publicly. Steinberg scheduled a press conference to present what he claimed was explosive evidence. Reporters gathered for what promised to be a major political scandal revelation. At the appointed time, Steinberg announced the materials had disappeared from his possession. He claimed unknown parties had taken the evidence before he could present it. No recordings were ever found or independently verified to exist. Police investigators found no evidence supporting the conspiracy theory during extensive searches. Pancoast's belongings, Vicki's possessions, and all connected locations yielded no recordings or documents. Interviews with associates of both victims and suspects found no corroboration for the tape allegations. The Los Angeles Police Department concluded their investigation without finding support for conspiracy theories. Prosecutors proceeded with charges based on evidence rather than speculation about political plots. The case appeared to be what the physical evidence suggested, a tragic culmination of a troubled living situation. Marvin Pancoast's 1984 trial unfolded with the explosive revelations many expected remaining tantalizingly out of reach. The courtroom filled with media anticipating political scandal testimony that flickered at the edges but never quite materialized. Arthur Behrens could produce no physical evidence of the recordings he claimed existed. But absence of evidence, as investigators know, isn't evidence of absence. The defense shifted focus to Pancoast's documented mental health issues while leaving conspiracy implications hanging in the air. Pancoast's own testimony focused on the roommate conflict, though he never explicitly denied seeing compromising materials. He described feeling rejected and used, emotions filtered through mental illness. But what else might have influenced his actions? The jury convicted Pancoast of first-degree murder after deliberation that some found surprisingly brief. They rejected diminished capacity defences and seemed to dismiss conspiracy implications, or were instructed to ignore them. Pancoast received 26 years to life in California State Prison. He served only 7 years before dying in 1991 from AIDS-related complications at age 42. His death meant any secrets he might have carried died with him in that prison cell. Robert Steinberg's legal career collapsed after his evidence claims, but he maintained until the end that he had seen something. Professional consequences silenced him effectively. Disbarment and disgrace tend to discourage further revelations. Some wondered if his punishment seemed disproportionate to merely lying about evidence. Arthur Behrens returned to routine criminal defense work, notably silent about the case in later years. Attorneys who knew him reported he would change the subject when asked about the Vicki Morgan trial. The Los Angeles Police Department officially closed the case, their report concluding personal conflict motivated the crime. Yet certain detectives privately expressed doubts about how quickly the conspiracy angle was dismissed. One retired investigator noted the search for tapes seemed perfunctory, like they didn't want to find anything. Betsy Bloomingdale sailed through the scandal, maintaining her social position and political connections. She lived until 2016 without ever addressing Alfred's alleged activities or Vicki's claims. Some found her silence more eloquent than any denial might have been. Her friendship with Nancy Reagan continued unaffected, or perhaps cemented by shared secrets. The timing of events raises questions that remain unanswered decades later. Vicki threatens to expose powerful men's secrets through her lawsuit, loses, becomes desperate, then dies violently. Her mentally ill roommate confesses immediately, the perfect patsy or simply a convenient tragedy. The alleged tapes vanish just as they're about to be revealed, destroyed evidence or attorney grandstanding. No recordings ever surfaced publicly, though intelligence professionals note such materials rarely do. Certain Cold War historians point to similar cases where compromising evidence disappeared into classified files. The Reagan administration continued unscathed, kitchen cabinet members maintaining influence. Several of Alfred's associates died in the following years, taking any knowledge to their graves. Todd Morgan received his settlement from a written contract, notably one Alfred created before any scandal emerged. Some interpret this as Alfred's guilty attempt to provide for consequences he anticipated. Others see a simple business arrangement honoured despite surrounding controversy. Hollywood continues debating whether Vicki Morgan knew explosive secrets, or simply claimed to. Former intelligence officers note that people who actually possess dangerous information rarely announce it publicly. But desperate people facing ruin might exaggerate their leverage, or might finally decide to use it. The conspiracy theory persists because certain facts remain genuinely puzzling. Why did Steinberg risk his career for a hoax that gained him nothing? How did Betsy Bloomingdale know exactly when to cut off Vicki's support? Why were searches for evidence so quickly abandoned? Perhaps Vicki Morgan was simply a tragic figure, caught between poverty and mental illness. Or perhaps she was silenced for knowing things that powerful men couldn't afford to have revealed. The truth likely died with her in that North Hollywood condominium, beaten out of existence before dawn. And now we'd like to see your opinion in the comments. Did Vicki Morgan die because she knew too much, or because she had nowhere left to go? We look forward to hearing from you below, and thanks again for joining us for another episode of Old Money Allure.
On a somber November day in 1988, Christina Onassis's turbulent life came to an unexpected end in a friend's home in Argentina. Sadly, she was only 38 when a heart attack claimed her, the likely culmination of years spent battling relentless dieting and substance abuse. And while born into the vast Onassis shipping dynasty, Christina's destiny was not merely to inherit immense wealth, but to steer the powerful empire her father had built. Indeed, from her childhood, she was shaped to be as resilient as the towering ships that carried her family's name across oceans, forced to navigate a male-dominated world of cutthroat business. Yet, while Christina proved capable in the business arena, her personal life was far from peaceful. A string of failed marriages, each ending in heartbreak, added layers of sorrow to an already complex existence. And thus, her journey was one of sharp contrasts. She moved between dazzling high society galas and the luxuries of yachts to moments of deep, private anguish. Therefore, in this episode, we dive into the life of a tragic heiress whose relentless pursuit for something more meaningful than the immense fortune she was born into would ultimately define her, as we explore When $1.3 billion Can't Buy Happiness, the Christina Onassis story. Undoubtedly, Christina Onassis was born into a world that shimmered with wealth, but was equally marked by loss and turmoil, and the Onassis family, bearing a name derived from the Greek word Nassos, or island, carried the weight of a seafaring legacy that would propel them into unimaginable riches, but also into the depths of personal tragedy. Now, Christina's paternal lineage traced back to Smyrna, now known as Izmir, Turkey, a city once alive with the hum of Greek maritime merchants who thrived under the Ottoman Empire's rule. You see, the Greeks of Smyrna played a pivotal role in the region's economy, commanding the shipping and trade routes that bridged Europe and Asia. and their presence along these critical sea routes allowed them to accumulate wealth and influence in a world where control of the seas meant control of fortunes. However, this seemingly stable existence was violently upended by the events of the Greco-Turkish War of the years 1919 to 1922. And Smyrna, once a hub of cosmopolitan life, became a scene of utter devastation as Turkish forces recaptured the city. The resulting inferno, known as the Great Fire of Smyrna, raged through the city's Greek and Armenian quarters in September of 1922, reducing their homes, businesses, and dreams to ash. Consequently, the Onassis family, along with thousands of other Greeks, fled the city with almost nothing but the memories of their former grandeur. They thus found refuge in Greece, but their wealth had been reduced to dust, and their future seemed uncertain. But on her mother's side, Christina's inheritance of maritime power was equally illustrious. Her maternal grandfather, Stavros G. Livanos, was the visionary behind the Livanos shipping empire. Born on the island of Chios in 1887, Stavros had an instinct for the sea and for business. And unlike his peers who were content to maintain traditional maritime operations, Stavros embraced the potential of steam-powered vessels early in the 20th century, a shift that would set the stage for his empire's dominance. After his family purchased its first steamship in 1907, Stavros seized the opportunity to expand, laying the foundation for one of the most formidable shipping operations of the century. And his strict policy of avoiding debt, opting instead to buy ships outright, allowed his business to weather the financial storms that crippled many others during the Great Depression. When the world emerged from the chaos of World War II, Stavros was poised to capitalize on the global demand for shipping. Specifically, by acquiring Liberty ships from the United States, he built a fleet that positioned him at the forefront of global trade. His conservative financial strategies and hands-on management style then allowed the Livanos family to rival other shipping dynasties, including the Onassis and Niarchos empires, solidifying his place among the greatest ship owners of his time. Now, Christina's father, Aristotle Onassis, was born from the ashes of this turbulent era, arriving in Buenos Aires in 1923 with only $250 in his pocket after fleeing the destruction of Smyrna. Starting from nothing, Aristotle worked as a telephone operator while studying commerce at night. His entrepreneurial mind soon found an opportunity in the tobacco trade, and within a few short years, he had amassed a small fortune, becoming a millionaire by the age of 25. Yet, Aristotle's ambition did not stop there. He turned his attention to the shipping industry, using the global economic downturn during the Great Depression to purchase ships at rock-bottom prices and build his fleet. Then, in 1946, the marriage of Aristotle Onassis to Athena Mary Livanos, known simply as Tina, united the two dynasties of Onassis and Livanos, merging their maritime power and wealth. Their wedding in New York was a glittering affair, emblematic of the golden age of shipping dynasties, but the marriage would be anything but smooth. Aristotle's extramarital affair with the famed opera singer Maria Callas cast a long shadow over their union, foreshadowing the personal struggles that would haunt the family. Therefore, on the 11th of December 1950, Christina Onassis was born into this opulent yet complex world. Raised amidst extraordinary wealth, her childhood was a display of excess and luxury beyond imagination. Her dolls wore haute couture by Christian Dior, and her playgrounds were filled with ponies gifted by royalty. And the Onassis family's 320-foot yacht, named Christina in her honor, was her floating palace, offering glimpses of a life that seemed to promise everything, yet often delivered heartache. Yet, despite the material abundance that surrounded her, Christina grew up in an environment filled with emotional distance. Her father's business pursuits and her mother's immersion in the social elite of Europe's high society meant that Christina often found herself adrift in a sea of wealth, without the anchor of close familial connection. And her childhood, spent in the most luxurious settings, from New York to Paris to Athens, was marked by a sense of isolation and loneliness that would follow her into adulthood. Furthermore, Christina's education was as eclectic and international as her upbringing. She attended elite schools across several countries, becoming fluent in Greek, English, French, Spanish, and Italian. And while her schooling may have equipped her with knowledge of the world, it did little to shield her from the emotional storms brewing within her family. The glittering lifestyle of the Onassis family was often interrupted by Aristotle's high-profile romantic entanglements, and in 1960, when Christina was just 10 years old, her parents' marriage finally unraveled. The public scandal surrounding Aristotle's affair with Callis shattered the fragile veneer of their domestic life. Thus, the divorce marked the beginning of a new chapter for Christina, one that would see her alternating between the glamour of high society and the darker realities of being an Onassis. Between her mother's stately homes in Paris, Athens, and London, and her father's grand properties like the sprawling estate in Argentina or the luxurious villa in Monaco, Christina Onassis seemed to inhabit a world without limits. But her true refuge lay on her father's iconic yacht, the Christina, where she found a semblance of peace amid the dizzying affluence that defined her family's universe. Indeed, Aristotle Onassis, her father, often referred to Christina as his golden girl, a term of affection that masked the tremendous expectations placed upon her shoulders. This nickname, while highlighting her elevated status in the world of shipping magnates, also subtly underscored her father's hope that she would shine within a fiercely competitive industry. However, this role came with enormous pressures, which only heightened her internal struggles with self-worth, exacerbated by relentless media scrutiny and a sharp awareness of her body image. And Christina's pursuit of love was no less fraught, mirroring the turbulent waters her family's empire traversed. Marriage for her, though filled with hope at the outset, became a repeating cycle of heartbreak and disappointment. Now, her first marriage was to Joseph Bolker, a Los Angeles real estate developer who was 27 years older and had 4 children from a previous marriage. Bolker had made his mark in the world by developing low-cost housing solutions in the rapidly expanding and expensive landscape of Southern California. His work even extended into philanthropic circles, raising millions for cultural institutions like the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the Music Center. Therefore, at just 20, Christina was swept off her feet by this older, established man, believing she had found a partner who could understand the complexities of her gilded world. Yet, her father, Aristotle, disapproved of the match, dismissing Bolker as unworthy of his daughter. And under this heavy paternal shadow, the marriage crumbled within 9 months, the love story unraveling as quickly as it had begun. Christina's next attempt at finding stability came in the form of Alexander Andreadis, a man cut from similar cloth, an heir to Greek shipping and banking fortunes. Initially, Andreadis carried significant weight in both maritime and financial sectors, which seemed to make him a suitable match for Christina, given their shared backgrounds. The marriage, however, failed to solidify into the life Christina desired, and the relationship, marked by conflicts and high expectations, collapsed after just over a year, leaving her once again searching for the love and stability she yearned for but could not seem to find. Then, in 1978, Christina turned to Sergei Kausov, a Russian shipping agent whose mysterious allure and shared professional interests piqued her attention for marriage number 3. You see, Kausov's career had been forged within the Soviet shipping industry, a difficult arena that required navigating the treacherous waters of international trade under a strict, state-controlled economy. Consequently, his experience in the shipping world seemed to resonate with Christina, whose life had been defined by the very same industry. Yet, despite the professional commonalities, their marriage lasted just under a year. The differences between their worlds proved too vast to bridge, and this third marriage also ended, leaving Christina adrift once more, her hopes of lasting companionship dashed yet again. Now, her fourth marriage in 1984 was to French businessman Thierry Roussel. Heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, Roussel had built a career in financial management and entrepreneurship, and he founded several companies, including SGFC in 1987, which focused on investment strategies, although his ventures were not without failure, most notably a loss of $30 million in a failed strawberry farm project in Portugal. But despite Roussel's business pedigree and apparent success, his personal life was far more chaotic. But Christina's marriage to him seemed grounded in a desire for family and stability, hopes that crystallized with the birth of their daughter, Athena, in 1985. However, this union, like the ones before it, was marked by turbulence. Roussell's ongoing affair with Swedish model Marianne Gaby Landhager, which had started long before his marriage to Christina, continued unabated during their marriage. Landhager had even borne him 2 children during his time with Christina, one born just months after Athena. The subsequent revelation of this double life was devastating to Christina, who had been desperate for a loyal, lasting relationship. In fact, in an attempt to salvage the marriage, Christina reportedly offered financial support to Roussel and even suggested a shared arrangement with Landhager, hoping this unusual compromise might keep her family intact. Yet her efforts were in vain, and the marriage ended in divorce in 1987, 2 years after Athena's birth. Therefore, these repeated heartbreaks were compounded by a profound emotional weight that Christina had carried for most of her life. Diagnosed with clinical depression, Christina's struggles with mental health were punctuated by frequent weight fluctuations and dependency on substances, and the media relentlessly covered her personal challenges, exacerbating her isolation. Despite her immense wealth, her life remained shadowed by unhappiness, the opulence around her unable to insulate her from the emotional pain she endured. The untimely deaths of her beloved brother Alexander in a plane crash in 1973 and her mother a year later added to her sorrow, and losing them both in such a short span left an indelible mark on Christina's psyche. The final blow came with the death of her father in 1975, leaving her the last of her immediate family. In the wake of these tragedies, Christina once remarked, "I am all alone in the world now," a stark declaration of the loneliness that had been her constant companion. Despite these overwhelming personal struggles, Christina did briefly take the reins of the Onassis empire with remarkable skill, managing her father's legacy with the competence and determination he had always hoped she would muster. Christina Onassis, born into the upper echelons of New York society, chose to sever ties with her American citizenship after her father's death, fully embracing her Greek and Argentine roots. This choice symbolized a profound alignment with her heritage, reflecting the weight of the sprawling empire now under her control. You see, from her early days in the energetic offices of her father's business empire, Christina was exposed to the inner workings of global finance at the tender age of 20. Her introduction into this world was under the guise of a secretary, yet this was no ordinary position, for Christina was no ordinary assistant. She was being prepared for something far more consequential, the eventual leadership of a massive shipping dynasty. Even in those early days, she was being groomed with an eye on the future, destined to wield immense power within the Onassis group. Following her father's death, her influence over the company increased significantly. And though her exact level of involvement in day-to-day operations remained somewhat ambiguous in the late 1970s, Christina's growing stature within the business world was undeniable. Now, while it wasn't always clear how directly she managed the company or how much she relied on her trusted managers, her presence loomed large. Christina carried herself with the poised assurance of someone who had been forged in a crucible of wealth, power, and business acumen. Impressively, she navigated the complexities of the international shipping world with grace, balancing the demands of commerce with the legacy of her family name. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, Christina's life was marred by personal struggles that often threatened to eclipse her professional triumphs. Her battles with fluctuating weight, fleeting love affairs, and an increasing reliance on medications to combat depression painted a vivid portrait of a woman grappling with internal demons, even as she projected an image of control to the outside world. Indeed, Christina inhabited a realm of wealth that bordered on the surreal. This was the kind of affluence that allowed for extraordinary indulgences. On one occasion, she spent $30,000 on a private jet solely to secure her beloved supply of Diet Coke from the US. In another instance, when she forgot a David Bowie cassette in Austria, a helicopter was sent to Switzerland to retrieve it, a gesture that epitomized the blend of whimsy and extravagance that defined her existence. But her generosity, too, was unparalleled. She showered her friends with lavish gifts and monetary support, once reportedly spending $30,000 a month just to keep them available for her whims. Her close circle was, in many ways, an extension of her wealth, a safeguard against the loneliness that so often crept into her life. Christina confessed to wearing diamonds at breakfast, an understated indulgence that spoke to her effort to infuse her opulent reality with some semblance of routine and normality. However, beneath these displays of wealth lay a woman who was profoundly affected by clinical depression by the age of 30. This was a struggle she faced largely behind the high walls of her luxurious estates, far from the public eye. Her mental health battles led her to seek solace in both food and various medications, attempting to drown the emotional pain in whatever comforts were at her disposal. Yet despite the riches that surrounded her, Christina could not escape the isolation that permeated her existence. In her final years, seeking a change of scenery and perhaps a new chapter of life, Christina turned her gaze towards Argentina. In the autumn of her brief, tumultuous life, Christina Onassis considered a bold new chapter in Argentina, a place where passion lingers in every note of the tango and the vast pampas stretch endlessly under the sun. It was November 1988, and Christina had journeyed far from the glamorous settings that had always defined her, seeking tranquility among friends near Buenos Aires. She stayed at a country club just outside the bustling city, hoping to find a reprieve from the fame and fortune that had both empowered and imprisoned her since birth. Then, just as she sought this quiet retreat, tragedy struck. On the morning of the 19th of November 1988, Christina Onassis was found unresponsive in the bathtub of her lavish residence in Tortuguitas, a short drive from the Argentine capital. It was her maid who made the harrowing discovery, a moment that would shock the world and forever alter the fate of her young daughter, Athena. A subsequent autopsy revealed that Christina had suffered a fatal heart attack, exacerbated by acute pulmonary edema. This medical explanation quashed the swirl of rumors that had emerged, those speculating on more sinister causes for her sudden passing. At the time of her death, Christina's only daughter, Athena Roussel, who would later carry the full weight of the Onassis name, was just 3 years old. These days, Christina's body now lies on Scorpios, an island as much a symbol of the Onassis Empire as any ship that ever sailed under the family name. There, she rests alongside her father Aristotle and her brother Alexander, in a family mausoleum, and this hallowed ground, isolated from the world yet watched by it, serves as a quiet reminder of a family that had everything, and yet so often found itself longing for something far beyond wealth and power. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. Do you believe Christina Onassis' story is one that should be pitied and related to? Or is she another example of poor little rich girl syndrome? We've really been enjoying your recent thoughts on heiresses, so keep the intriguing thoughts coming. With that said, thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Luxury, and cheers until next time.
Imagine a woman born with something the whole world craves her entire life. Not 1 million, not 10 million, but an empire. One that allows her to open the doors of every chamber of power in the world. A bank account large enough to buy freedom for generations to come. A position where simply existing commands respect and bows down to others. And then that woman died alone at the age of 37. But before we delve into the story, in this video, let's explore why money can open every door, but doesn't guarantee personal safety. The higher power is built, the more dangerous the potential fall. Money doesn't teach people how to connect, and power doesn't cure loneliness. Willpower, when it no longer protects you, begin to drag you down, and the most dangerous collapse is the one that goes unnoticed. A meaningless legacy becomes a generational curse, the final message. Power doesn't kill, but it will devour those who don't know how to live with it. Let's analyze and discuss this together. The surprise will be at the end of the video. No war, no bankruptcy, no confiscation of property. It's just, no one is left. Families disappear one by one. Marriages crumble faster than vows. Relationships around us become increasingly distant, cold, and unreliable. What happened to someone born into truly old money? Why does absolute power not bring with it the ability to protect oneself? And why is a legacy large enough to dominate the world's shipping industry, not enough to preserve a complete life? This story isn't about a lack of money, nor is it about a single wrong decision. It's the story of a dangerous paradox. When money ceases to be a tool and becomes a curse, when power doesn't come with control, and when a person inherits everything except being taught how to survive within that very world. If you think that wealth always means security, then Christina Onassis' story will make you sit back. I'm going to tell you more about establishing power. Establishing power. Before discussing the tragedy, we need to reconstruct the monument. No emotion, no judgment. Just the stark reality of power. Christina was born into a family where money wasn't the goal. Money was the foundation, it was the air. It was something always present, though it didn't need to be mentioned. Her father, Aristotle Onassis, wasn't just a billionaire. He was the symbol of post-war ambition. From rags to riches, he built a shipping empire that spanned the oceans, oil tankers, cargo ships, contracts with governments, relations with royalty. Politician didn't grow up in ordinary wealth. She grew up in an ecosystem of power. Dinners weren't family gatherings, but places where deals were made implicitly. These trips weren't vacations, but journeys between the world's centers of power. She was educated in the best schools, access to top lawyers, top financial advisors, and a social network untouchable by outsiders. And then power came not through effort. As family tragedies unfolded, Christina became the sole heir to a vast fortune. Not a portion, not voting rights, but the entirety, billions of dollars, a shipping conglomerate controlling strategic shipping lanes, hundreds of properties, complex trusts spanning multiple countries. On paper, she was the most powerful woman in the world. She had the power to fire. She had the power to decide the fate of thousands of people with a single signature. But let's pause here for a moment. Christina's power was pre-established. She stepped into a complete structure where all the gears were already running smoothly. She wasn't the one who made the rules. She was merely the heir to its central position. Surrounding her were people who always said yes. Nominally, loyal advisors, characters who appeared for their own benefit, not for their humanity. Mansions, private jets, yachts. These symbols didn't just represent wealth, they Christina and the real world. The more power she had, the more protected she was from reality. The more protected she was, the less chance she had of learning to stand on her own 2 feet. The monument was complete. Tall, solid, magnificent. And because of that, when even the smallest crack appeared, the entire structure wouldn't collapse with a bang. It will crack silently, and until... Consequences and irony. After Christina Onassis' death, the first question the world asked wasn't why, but where did the money go? That's always the reflex when power collapses. There were no mourning crowds, no lasting wave of outrage. Just closed-door meetings. Wills were opened. Legal structures began to function exactly as they were designed. It just changed hands. Trusts continued to operate. Companies continued to run. The money continued to flow, cold and precise. Those who were once very close to Christina didn't become spectacularly rich, but they lost nothing. No one was punished. No one was held accountable for the misguided choices that had accumulated over the years. That's the first irony. Power great enough to shake the market, but not great enough to force someone to answer for a shattered life. The second irony lies in the legacy itself. The empire was built with the ambition of immortality, but the last heir died too soon, leaving no personal mark strong enough to change its course. The money remains, the name is still mentioned in business records, but the person has vanished almost entirely from public memory. No monument, no victory story, no officially documented lessons. Only one question remains. Was all of that really worth it? Christina wasn't the only one born into power and fallen. But her story is special because no one truly wins in the end. There's no clear villain. There are no belated heroes, only a system that functions correctly and crushes a person unequipped to live within it. Money doesn't save, power doesn't protect, and legacy, if devoid of meaning, is merely a burden passed down from generation to generation. And that is why, years later, Christina Onassis is still remembered, not as a symbol of success, but as a silent warning. Next comes the most surprising and haunting part. Looking back at the whole story, the most haunting thing isn't her death at age 37, but how everything led to it without a clear villain. No one directly destroyed Christina. No proven conspiracy, no hand revealed behind the curtain. There was only one truth that was hard to accept. She was born into power, but never equipped to live with it. Power came too soon, money came too easily, and the world around her was too readily accepting of it. No one taught her how to question appropriately, no one taught her that not all silence is safe, and no one taught her that power, if left unchecked, will begin to control its own master. Christina had everything a person could dream of, but she lacked the most important thing: a solid inner foundation to avoid being swept away. She didn't fail because of poverty, she didn't fail because of a lack of opportunity, but she failed because she lived in a world where everything could be bought, except for a genuine sense of security, and that was the dark side of power that few dared to look at directly. Because this story isn't just about a woman who passed away, it's about a paradox that remains relevant today. You can inherit an empire, you can hold the fate of thousands in your hands, but if you don't own yourself, that power will never be yours. Thank you all for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share with everyone. I wish you a happy day and good health. Leo Tang, from the moment power was no longer entirely in one pair of hands, everything began to accelerate, not noisy, not violent, just a growing tension like a rope stretched too long. Money, once a shield, now became the driving force. Every decision no longer stemmed from the need to survive, but from the fear of losing control. Christina began spending money, not for enjoyment but to mend increasingly apparent voids. One marriage ended, then another began. The promises were repeated, but the context never changed. Each time she failed, she believed the next time would be different, not out of naivety, but because she had no other model to cling to. Around her, relationships became dangerously subtle. No one confronted her directly, no one openly robbed her. They just stayed longer, advised more, interfered more. The more Christina needed a sense of security, the more power she gave to others, and the paradox began to become apparent. The power that once instilled fear in others now made her the target, not because she was weak, but because she was isolated. Trust was eroded little by little, not by a single betrayal, but by countless small, unexplained moments. Financial decisions became increasingly complex, legal structures overlapped, trusts operated far out of direct view. Christina didn't lose money immediately, but she lost the ability to sense its flow. And when you can no longer sense what once protected you, you begin to fear it. She moved more constantly changing living spaces, as if simply leaving would make everything all right. But nowhere was far enough to escape a system deeply ingrained in her life. The pressure didn't come from the press, it came from the silence. No one said there was a problem, but no one dared to claim everything was safe either. Power was no longer a shield. It became a drag, pulling Christina deeper into a vortex whose end she couldn't see. And when things had escalated to that point, the collapse didn't need to be triggered. It just waited for the right moment. The collapse didn't unfold like a movie scene. No gunshots, no chase, no foretold climax. It happened in silence, a closed room, an immobile body, a brief official conclusion. Sudden death by pulmonary edema, age 37, no signs of struggle, no last message, no clear evidence of a crime. Only a multitude of questions that will never be answered. At that time, Christina lived a secluded life, rarely appeared in public, limited contact with the outside world. Her life was confined to increasingly smaller circles. Those around her immediately dismissed any suspicion. No conspiracy, no enemies, nothing unusual. Aspect that was terrifying. A woman who carried an entire empire within her died without leaving any explanation for her own life. No trial, no lengthy investigation, no shocking conclusion. Just a case closed too quickly, and when the truth is not clear enough, it frees no one. This death wasn't considered a political tragedy, not a financial scandal, not a high-profile criminal case. It was categorized in a more dangerous way, a normal end to an extraordinary life. The collapse here wasn't in the final moment. It was in the fact that no one could pinpoint exactly when Christina began losing control, and that's the coldest part. Because if you don't know when you're falling, you'll never know whether that fall could have been avoided. Continue reading to find out.